I'm just down here at Yonge and Dundas Square by the Billboard Babes with my new friends on my unicycle. Chenzo, Ken, Swiss guy, the Scarborough criminal, and all the screaming people. That's nice. That's nice. Very good. Everybody's happy. Everyone's delighted. Everyone's together. Community time. Bringing it together in Toronto. Like the old school, I have Spandy Andy over there. He represented today. We just had a great time. I've got my new girlfriend, Andrea. Anything you want to say to my mom? She's very nice. She doesn't say much, but she's quite nice. And we wish you were here. Thanks. Cow here. There you go. He's really liking the salt content of my tire. Oh, that's getting a little bit too close to the genitalia. So I'm just going to turn the bod. What happened there was that the young cow's licking had come a little bit too close to the genitalia. I was talking to a gentleman called Vikram the other day, and he's saying there's 3 reasons that Indian folks love cows so much. And one is that they're vegetarian. And another one is that they're so peaceful. They're givers and not takers. Apparently there's a proverb that says that the cow, the highest expression of order. Cow is the highest expression of order. Let's get right in there with your fingers on the cow, and they really enjoy that. You get right there behind the ear of the cow, and that's just nice.
So that was some wise words from Mike there, and let's begin. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Whining On. My name is Matthew Bowden, the Incorrigible Rogue, and today I have the incredible Dynamike. Mike, how you doing, buddy?
Very well.
It's good to see you.
I would like to say that Brian is watching, and he said that there's no sound.
They might have cut sound because of music in the videos. Sometimes Facebook tries to be clever and it picks up on the promos, picks up some copyrighted stuff. Brian, if you could let us know, hopefully this should be sound back now with any luck. I'm going to keep grinding on anyway, because hopefully this won't be an issue. Let's get rid of the widgets that are dotted about here. And sound is fine now. Banging. Great. So one quick thing to say. I know most of you are regular watchers, so this won't be a challenge for you, but for people who've just joined, if you could help the channel, it'd be most appreciated by liking, sharing. If you're watching and you hear anything you like, you want any questions to be asked, you want anything to be talked about, or you just want to say something to the people watching the room as well, or the people me and Mike here doing the interview, just pop it in the comments. We'll be happy to read it and pick it up. If you can subscribe, if you can follow the Incorrigible Rogue, join the YouTube channel, if you can join the Patreon, all of that stuff's amazing. I won't bore you anymore with that stuff, and let's get on to the interview. So Mike, first thing, can you give us just a very brief description of what you do?
Oh God, probably not. What do I do now? I was thinking before we started, I was trying to think about the last time I did a show. So what I do is, show-wise, is try to remember what it was that I did. I think the last time I did a show was in a city called Calling, for about 35 children about 4 months ago. Yeah, in October or something. But what do I do in general, on the street, or in general when the pandemic is?
However you want to describe it, just very brief, just to give a bit of context before we go into telling your life story.
So I am a 40-year-old male, and my head is a little bit too big for my body. Just a little bit. I think a lot. I very much enjoy telling jokes and poking fun at the human condition, I suppose. Yeah, I like looking in through the cracks, as it were, and bringing some of the aspects of humanity that are in the shadows into the light, because they're often funny, and they're not always funny. They're also often interesting, and interesting probably gives rise to opportunities to be funny, I guess.
Cool. Well, that's, I think, a really great and interesting and semi-mysterious description you've furnished everybody watching with there. So I feel like we're well armed now to begin the story. So, okay. Young Michael, when you're a young child, are you a performer? Are you involved? Is the performance involved in your life as a young person?
I was certainly hyperactive, and I've noticed that I have a knee-jerk reaction to any implication made by any person relative to the potential of me having a syndrome of behaviors that might be qualified as ADHD. So I was a hyperactive kid, to be sure, and my hyperactivity usually gravitated toward attention seeking. So from the very beginning, as much as I can remember, when there was people around, I wanted to be inside the action, and if not in the center of the action, close to it.
Yeah, and I'd like to focus on the beginning a lot more, but there was something you said there that triggered my interest a little bit as a fellow person who was a young person diagnosed with being hyperactive attention deficit disorder. Attention hyperactive deficit disorder. Was you said you didn't like
hyperactive attention? No, attention active. I can't remember either.
Attention deficit hyperactive disorder.
There we are.
Yes, good. And so you were diagnosed as a young person, and you said that you didn't like to.
I wasn't diagnosed. Yeah, I wasn't diagnosed. But if ever anybody mentions that maybe I should have been, I notice that I say no, in a way that suggests you're probably got something there.
But there's something else suggested by that, and that's the thing that you aren't happy with that diagnosis, and I was interested why.
I don't think in general, I think it's good to ask when there is any sort of social institution or any sort of social structure. I can't think of a social structure that doesn't have some sort of hierarchy of authority, and certainly the psychological community or the industrial psychological
complex,
yeah. Or the, what is it again? Disorder, hyperactive, attention, whatever that thing is.
Attention deficit hyperactive disorder.
Industrial psychological complex. I think that those people have a vested interest in diagnosing people who are, variously diverse everywhere, in such a way as to be able to sell medication. So I don't really trust the whole mental health spectrum picture thing.
So it sounds like you have a fear of the fact that the industry might pathologize characteristics instead of having a complex view of what it is to be a human being. Would that be fair to say?
That's exactly what I was going to say next.
There you go. Yeah. Very interesting. So let's draw back to you being a young person. What's your family life like? What's your environment like as you're running around trying to draw attention to yourself?
That's my well, I have an older brother and we have an older sister. My older brother's named Phil, my older sister's named Jess, and the three of us have a younger sister named Ange. We are all set 2 years apart, so there's a lot of us. When I was born, we lived in a city, if you can imagine, for those of us watching in Europe, I'm in Europe now, but if you go across the Atlantic Ocean, just between America and Canada, there's a big mouthed inlet, which leads to a river, which goes past Montreal in toward Toronto, called the St. Lawrence River, and there's those 5 lakes, the big lakes, they're like seas. And the first of those, the easternmost, is Lake Ontario, and at the of Lake Ontario, the edge, there's a city called Hamilton. I was born in Hamilton, and I grew up in it's like an intersuburb between Hamilton and Toronto, a city called Burlington. And we grew up in a suburb neighborhood where there was lots of kids around. So I remember when I moved when I was 7. So in the years prior to being 7, we were always running around outside with all the neighborhood kids. There's lots of kids around. Their parents were around. I remember the 1950s, weirdly in the way that I see like 1950s movies, like before the internet, before like, you know, lots of like ubiquitous technology. We were just riding our bikes and running around and causing trouble and having fun. That's what my childhood was like.
Yeah.
And
was the performance, did your family used to perform or sing or do poetry or take to the stage?
Not so much. In terms of performing, though, I do remember that, you know what a Ghost Rider is?
The comic book with the guy with the skull face.
Him too, but what I was thinking about was this thing where you ride a BMX bike and then you take your leg off the side and you jump off it and run. And then the bike rides without you, as if a ghost is riding it, as if that bad guy from Marvel Comics universe is riding it. And I remember, I think probably the first performance thing I ever did was that. There was this hill immediately in front of our house, and so I would ride my bike and then jump off my bike, and the bike would go down the street, and I would run as fast as I could beside it. And one of the kids who thought that was cool, named John and Bill. What was their last name? I can't remember what their last name was. Anyway, they would give me Oreo cookies every time I did, so it was kind of like busking.
Yeah. It's like any sort of entertainment. You supplied some joy, and they compensated you for it. And as you got older, did you in high school do performance? Were you involved in that, interested in that?
Yeah, I started performing while I was still in high school. I was 16. Well, actually, I mentioned that geography. So when I was 7, my family moved from Burlington, this suburb between Hamilton and Toronto, and that first of the 5 Great Lakes. And we moved a little bit north and a little bit east, sort of between Toronto and Ottawa, to a city called Peterborough, which is in these rolling hills of central Ontario. And that's where I finished growing up from when I was 7 until I was about 20. And somewhere in there, I started gymnastics. And so when I was in high school, from middle school, like from grade 7 onward until the end of high school, I could do handstands and flips, and every opportunity I got, I would find some reason to walk up and down a set of stairs on my hands, or do a backflip off a wall, or do a back handspring on the grass, or like as soon as I could do tricks that other people couldn't do, I was trying to show everybody for any reason, hey, did you want to see this? And they would probably say no, and I would say, okay, well, you want to see it now? And they would say, okay, do it.
Aggressive attention seeking.
Something like that.
Yeah. And so when you said you're 16, you started performing, so that's different than what you're talking about now. That's not just trying to show off to friends and trying to garner attention. You're doing the beginnings of a constructed piece of performance. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And were you doing it on the street? What was the platform for that?
So the first street, actually no, the very first time I performed, I wasn't even 16 yet. I guess I was no, actually I was 16 because I could drive, and you have to be 16 to get a license, or you did at the time. The very first gig I ever had was when I was 16, I had a girlfriend named Margot, and she rode a unicycle. It's one of the things that attracted me to her, and she was a great dancer. Anyway, she had a unicycle, and she had a unicycle, so I got a unicycle, and then I learned how to unicycle with my girlfriend. And maybe I learned before we started dating. I can't remember. The unicycle attraction is somewhere in there. At any rate, so I could ride a unicycle, I could do handstands, and I could do flips. Not sure, and I could already juggle. I learned to juggle when I was 15. So the first gig I got was at a grocery store opening, and I worked for this woman called Mrs. Hamilton, who she had a costume shop in downtown Peterborough, and part of her business was to supply costumed entertainers, clowns and primarily clowns for me. I was a clown. And then other times I was Barney the dinosaur, you know, that purple dinosaur. And that was strange. So the first gig I ever had was riding my unicycle around as a clown for Mrs. Hamilton at the opening of some grocery store. And then I started doing a bunch of gigs as Barney the dinosaur. And then, you know, I was 16, but I was a gymnast, and so I was quite muscular. And Mrs. Hamilton started getting me to do singing telegrams. And so I'd go to her costume shop and get a whole pile of balloons, and then she'd give me an address. This is before Google Maps. So she'd give me an address, a bunch of balloons, and then send me on my way. And I would get lost several times before I found my destination, at which point I would deliver the balloons to whoever the balloon victim was and sing them a song in front of their friends and then leave. And a few times she was sort of like my pimp, which was quite charming in retrospect. And this one time she sent me to this lady's house, and she said, all right, listen, you're not going to wear a shirt underneath your blazer, okay? And if they say how old are you, you say 18 years old. I said, she sounds like Byron's mom. And you say 18 years old. I had to kiss these women too, so I'd go and like give them a thing, and then give them a kiss on the cheek, and then sing them a song and embarrass them, and then leave. So those were my first sort of gigs. And then I started busking, like within a year of doing all that, I did my first street show.
And what was your first street show like?
My first street show was at this place called Little Lake. The park beside Little Lake in downtown Peterborough has a name, but I can't remember the name of the park. But there's this park with this outdoor amphitheater, like a covered stage without walls, and like a little hill that people can sit on. You can probably, if it's packed out, it could host 2,000 or 3,000 people, maybe 4. And there's a parking lot, and on the way from the parking lot to that grassy area, there's this little like a little open space. I'll tell you, in North America, public squares and open paved spaces are much more rare than they are in Europe in general. Like there's a lot more roads, and the roads are a lot wider and a lot straighter in my experience, but public squares are a little more precious. So there was a square, and I went down there with my best buddy, one of my best buddies named Ryan, and he had this little orange pot, and I had this big trunk full of everything that I had, like every kind of juggling implement. In the parking lot and this park, and I would do back handsprings and do some tumbling, and then juggle fire, and then spin around, and then jump, and then go and tap somebody, and then duck, and then run over there and do a backflip, and just blah 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 blah. And Ryan would chase people around and get money. And in our first day, we made like I think $115.
Wow.
Which was like my first busking day. I made $115.
It's a lot of money to make in a day at 17 years old.
I was 16 still, but yeah, it was. I thought I figured it out. Like I thought, this is it. I'm gonna be a millionaire. I could just do my tricks and harass people. And then the next time, like about a week later, I did the same thing and made the same amount. Now, just for reference, as you say, a bunch of money for like this is 1996, and I worked at the time at Taco Bell. I had a part-time job at Taco Bell, and I think I was making something like $6.35 an hour. I'm not sure who it is who decides upon these numbers, but I think it was like $6.35. It might have been $6.25, and it was 20 hours, right? Like 20 hours of Taco Bell, or doing that once, and then on the third time of doing that, oh yeah, and then also Mrs. Hamilton. She would send me out as Barney the dinosaur, driving into out towards Bob Cajun. Bob Cajun sounds as remote as it is. And I would drive for an hour and then do this Barney the dinosaur thing and sweat like 30, like two liters, but for 30 minutes of pure sweat, in this monstrous suit, and then come back and she would give me $25. So yeah, between 20 hours of Taco Bell or 5 Hamilton adventures, Mrs. Hamilton adventures. It was pretty good.
Yeah, and so you're not afraid to move away from that to doing busking then?
No, I was absolutely delighted. Everything about it was absolutely delightful, except actually. So I did the 2 things where I was just running around harassing people, and then at some point, I don't actually remember how this worked, but I had seen a street performer festival already the year prior. I went to the Kingston Busker Fest, and amongst the many artists I saw a Butterfly Man in the flesh, and that was very inspiring. It was it was very inspiring. But somehow I put together that rather than just jumping around and doing these things, I could do a street show like him by calling people's attention, making a little line, getting them to stand and watch me, and then the first time I did that, these events where people would come to the park, they were coming for a concert that was set up by the city, and they happened. I guess they happened every Wednesday or something. So I was doing it Wednesday, and on the third Wednesday, I did a few 10 or 15-minute shows, and at the end, I would juggle fire on a rollerbola, and in there also, I did this thing where I'd have the torches in my hands, and I would run and do a backflip off of a light post, which is pretty cool.
Is it like the singing in the rain, running backflip kind of move? Yeah, I got you.
Yeah, and then I would unicycle with somebody on my shoulders, and I think that was it. And I juggled in there, and
but it sounds like you're developing an understanding of structure. This is you slowly figuring out how doing a structured street show works, the build, the middle, and having the finale. And through watching other people and then working on it yourself, you're starting to build the understanding of that, right?
Sort of. I don't think it's that straightforward, because I had the memory of a few artists at Kingston. But when I started, I didn't start like that. I was just harassing people. And I got as far structure-wise as just thinking that it's easier for me to stand here and have a whole bunch of people watch than chase them around so I can show them a trick. But structure, it's good that you asked that, because developing a street show structure didn't come actually for a while. So I'm 16 at the time when I was doing these shows at Little Lake. And then me and my buddy Ryan, we went on a little mini busking tour that same summer. So the season for these concerts opened maybe in May or June. And then in August of that year, 1996, we got this big trunk that we could hardly fit into the back of the car through the back door. And we took a couple blankets, not even sleeping bags. We took a couple blankets and drove to a few places in Ontario no one will have heard about, except for Toronto. We drove to Toronto, and we went to do shows on the property of the Sky Dome. And I lasted about 4 seconds before the security came and kicked us out. And then we drove to a bunch of little towns and couldn't figure anything out. But then we went to a place called Wasaga Beach, which is actually, again, on one of those big lakes, on the Great Lakes. It's on Lake Huron, the third. And Wasaga Beach is like a little beach town on a lake, not the ocean, mind you, but it's significant. It's pretty. And then I did some shows at the nighttime there, and it went fairly well. But still, I was just kind of winging it, like trying to get people to watch me before I started, rather than harassing them on their walks. When structure really came together was I started working with a partner in '98. So this is 2 years later. I was doing Barney the dinosaur and like half naked singing telegrams and clowning here or there. And I had a partner called Tim Holland, who's a very interesting guy. Very interesting, very fit, very health conscious, very green conscious, politically active. He ran for the Green Party at one point in Canada. But he was a monstrously talented juggler, in the vein of like technical, dedicated, like practice, and do it right. And I was, on the other side of the rainbow, so to speak. But he and I made a show together, and in '98, and we toured it across Canada. We had a pretty big season our first year. What was your
show then?
What did we do in our show? Our finale was Tim stood on top of my shoulders. I stood on top of a rollerbola, and I juggled machetes, and he juggled fire. And that was a pretty good finale. And we started practicing passing. So like, if you can imagine passing, and then I would pass up and he would drop down. But at one time when we were practicing that, our clubs got mixed up, and one of them spun around and hit me in the tooth and broke my tooth. And so we took that out of the show. So that was our finale. Otherwise, actually, when I think about it, we're kind of technically pretty good for we did the thing with
juggling too high on a roller bowler is an impressive, you know, circus level trick.
Yeah,
It's not.
Yeah, it was a pretty.
Not something to be gawped at.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was a good trick, but I think I got a little bit lost in that story.
Yeah. So why did you guys not stick together then? Because it sounds like you had something that was working.
Yeah, we did. We had a lot of fun. We had a lot of. Yeah, Tim was a bit older than me. He was in university. Oh yeah, and I was going to be a missionary. There we are.
Why were you going to be a missionary?
Let me stick with Tim, and then I'll come back to the missionary.
Okay.
So we were practicing all this stuff at my church. We practiced in the gymnasium. Mormon churches have gymnasiums like 99 out of 100 times, and so we would, and they're called, weirdly, they're called cultural halls. Like, it's a cultural hall, but what it is a basketball court, you know, with a nice floor and some lighting and a stage. So we we learned all these tricks, and then we toured around Canada doing the festival circuit, including some busker festivals, including Kingston. And then as we toured west, the circuit in Canada used to start like in Eastern Canada, and then like the fringe circuit. So there's street festivals, like official festivals, and there's the fringe festival circuit. And when I was young, or at least in my world, that was prominent. You could get like really good gigs were busker fests, really great gigs were corporate paid events. Busker fests were really good, and fringe fests were also pretty good. In fact, in the 90s, they were really good. They're probably still really good. Just haven't done them in a while. Well, fringe, actually, Edinburgh, right? It's the festivals that have been inspired by Edinburgh. So we drove west. We went to a gig in Thunder Bay, which is, again, on another one of those lakes, the most western one, Lake Superior. And then beyond that, we went to Winnipeg, and then we went to Saskatoon. And Saskatoon was a 10-day festival. It was great. But in Saskatoon, Tim had some personal reasons he had to go back home. He was in university, and I continued from Saskatoon to Edmonton and then onward to Vancouver. And why didn't we stick together? When I left Saskatoon and went to Edmonton, in Saskatoon we met Alakazam and JP, and many other people, but Alakazam and JP primarily were really really inspiring gentlemen, as you can imagine. And when I got to Edmonton, I've been performing now for several months on the circuit around other artists and really starting to kind of figure it out. But then with Alakazam particularly took me under his wing and pointed out some of the very basics. He gave me a lot of advice. But
what kind of stuff did he point out?
He basically structure, you know, and JP too. But Al told me one thing. He said, you know, if you write down everything in your show, like everything that you do and everything that you say, if you just write that down and then get it in your mind, you can deviate from it, but you can always come back to it. And for me, I was like, oh, well, because my sort of method has never been developed, but if I were trying to express it to you now, it would go like this. I would go over here, and then I would think this, and I would ADHD off over here, and then go, yeah, maybe, you know? But he said that. And then I actually did that. I got a spreadsheet out, and I went do for an hour and a half. And at any rate, with Alakazam and JP on board, suddenly things started to like improve dramatically, and I didn't have to split the hat. And then also, whereas Tim was very structured, which was very helpful, when I realized that I could structure myself, it also allowed me to kind of be as flamboyant as I wanted to be, and that was important.
So you found a lot of freedom going solo. You found that you could be yourself more.
Yeah, and I could get all the hyperactivity out.
Yeah,
I'm 40 years old and I'm kind of chubby. When I was 19 and super fit, I had a lot more energy. And you know, one of the more exhausting aspects of energy is that it has to be expended. And street performing is a great place to cathect your overwhelming energy if you have it.
Yeah, there you go, kids. So you said that you wanted to be a missionary, and I suppose this is the thing that does or doesn't work out shortly after this. And I mean, why did you want to be a missionary? There's not many people that I've met in my everyday life that they want to, as a young person, become a missionary? What's the drive for that?
One sec. The drive to be a missionary is it's probably like more or less complex for other people, but for me, yeah, why do I want to be a missionary?
Well, before we go on to that, maybe can I ask this? So you said that you grew up in a Mormon environment, and is that a very different environment from someone who would grow up in a non-religious household? Is it more than a Church of England household, let's say? Is that a different upbringing? What was the upbringing like within that community?
Yeah, I can't speak for the Church of England. We have Anglicans in Canada, of course, but I didn't grow up in one of their homes. But yeah, Mormons are characteristically friendly, you know. Yeah, self-effacing, like friendly in that direction. They are supposed to be very outgoing, because the Mormon Church has three main drives, these three main purposes for all of its membership. And the third one is the weird one. But the first one is to perfect the saints. So Mormons are referred to as saints, like the people themselves, not the dead, disembodied other people. But the saints are the people who follow Jesus. The Mormon Church is officially called the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and the saints are the membership. So perfecting the saints, making people better or perfect, is one of the missions. The next one is proclaiming the gospel being the good word of Christ, like come and be saved, you know. Like everyone is in trouble spiritually on like a cosmic scale, but if you come with us, we can sort you out so that you can be saved, right? So proclaiming the gospel is the second one. Proclaim the gospel, bring the people in, make them perfect. And then the third one is redeeming the dead, which is very, very strange, which is doing ordinances, which are like ritual performances in order to enact covenants between people and God. And then redeeming the dead is doing that after you've done that for yourself, doing it for dead people, usually your forebears or your ancestors. So,
and is this something that you're very much you believe this, and this is your world, and this is your world is informed by these views at this point?
Certainly my world was informed by those views. The question of belief, like we could spend a lot of time trying to deconstruct what it is to believe something, you know, like belief is often just not doing that, not deconstructing things, you know. If you actually start taking apart your ideas, then beliefs, you know, sort of fall apart into observations or into just speculations or into just impositions on reality, you know. So yeah, belief to me is not thinking about your thoughts. Like a judgment. When you judge something, you stop thinking about it, right? Guilty, end of story, as opposed to really going on and what needs to happen next, blah, blah, blah. So I was certainly involved, deeply involved. These were the ideas that informed my day-to-day life. And you know, keeping it to street performing, the most interesting dynamic about my Mormon life, which was very much like the don't think about this stuff. That's what Mormonism is mentally, right? Like these are the things we think about. Where the hell is the camera? There. These are the things we think about. Don't think about that. Don't think about that. Don't think about that. Don't think about that. But when I was performing, this just disappeared. You know, like the performance moment is like a big now moment. You know, like a thick present moment. And yeah, that was one of the reasons I love street performing so much. Maybe the primary reason when I was young is that I was able to get rid of all the other noise. So Mormonism is this ever-present, don't think about that other stuff, because if you do, you're in trouble, right? So yeah, so why did I want to go and be a missionary? Because I didn't want to be in trouble. And the kind of trouble that Mormonism imposes, it's like poisonous, it's like an infection, you know? You whisper into kids' ears, don't think that, don't do that. Like basically the things you whisper to their ears, don't do that, don't say that, and don't even think it. And that's how the brainwashing happens. And so I was deeply brainwashed. to my parents' credit, my dad, who took me to church, my mom wasn't part of it, but she allowed it. Is that my dad was really, really like sincerely involved, and my mom was respectful of my dad's autonomy. And then as I grew up, my own autonomy. Before I went on my mission, when I was performing, I was kind of divided. Like on the one hand, there was the whole world to go perform. Like I could go perform anywhere. On the other hand, to be a missionary means to go to one place for 2 years and do very routine things in more or less hostile social engagements.
So it was creating a conflict at that point. You're kind of the trajectory and the way that you'd been brought to imagine your future and the things you were discovering as you were performing and going out and engaging with people in public space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was there was a conflict. Yeah. So I decided to go on a mission, but prior to going, I just finished this tour across Canada. I really, really enjoyed it. I left to be a missionary in November of '99, and I had toured up until September of that year. And in between, my mom told me, she took me apart. My mom, who didn't practice Mormonism, she said, you don't have to do this. And I said, yeah, Mom, but I want to. And did I really want to? I don't know.
Well, maybe there was part of you. A human being can be in conflict. They can desire opposing things at the same time. Yeah,
certainly.
And those two things have to battle within the individual. And it sounds like that was what was going on at the time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Did you, when you turned around to your mummy and said, this is what I want, did you feel conflict at that time? Were you kind of confident of your statement?
It's interesting you ask. I've thought about this stuff a lot. I left Mormonism decisively in 2006. So how long ago is that? It'll be almost 15 years almost. And I've thought a lot about the, the foreshadowing. Foreshadowing isn't just a literary device, but whatever it is that comes into reality in our lives has these various precedents which are immaterial until they become material. And so there was a bunch of moments in my life that I remember thinking, oh, this is probably not going to last. And that's one of them. That scene, I remember where it took place, of all the things that happened, which I don't remember. I remember that conversation where it actually took place. And there was others like it, but no, that one was, I wish I didn't go on a mission. I wish that I had done what my mom said.
Will that become more apparent talking about the mission, or was there something specific to that moment why you wish that?
Well, there is one thing that's specific about it, about the conflict. On the one hand, this unknown thing, going to be a missionary. I grew up in Mormonism, and in the church, missionaries from other places around the world are everywhere where there's Mormon churches. There's these pairs of missionaries that are coming to church on Sunday and going out and bringing other people once in a while, right? And so I got it. Like I understood what that was. And I also would go out with those missionaries in my own hometown, which was really, really weird.
Why was it weird?
Well, at school on Wednesday, walking up and down stairs on my hands, and then showing up with books in hands, like dressed up like like a 1950s business person, like with this missionary from Utah, right, trying to get into the house so we can sit down on the couch and harass people's families with ideas that are absolutely ludicrous. And then Wednesday at school, hey, you want to see a backflip? Like pretty weird. But so that one scene with my mom, I was in conflict. The next thing I think about in the same sense, like I wanted to keep performing, but then I had to go be a missionary, and it was like I had to. And I wanted to do what I had to do. Like I wanted to do what I was supposed to do. I wanted to be a good boy, And then at one point when I was a missionary, shortly after I went to be a Mormon missionary in Utah of all places. And shortly after I got there, it was the winter. And so I left in November, and Utah, because of its elevation, has snow, notwithstanding its latitude. And it was a very wintry day. And we had this missionary, everything in Mormonism is kind of a pyramid structure, like one pyramid, and then there's like 5 pyramids at this level. They go up to this pyramid, and this one goes up to the boss called the prophet, and then the next step is to Jesus. So there's just a few steps between anyone and Jesus.
And this is not like Scientology. It's not a money thing. It's a status thing, right? It's your position in the community as opposed to the workings of a monetary mechanism.
I don't know anything about Scientology, so I can't really comment. But the monetary principle in Mormonism is very active, but it's very simple. And yeah, I'll put this out of the way. Mormons live by the law of tithing. You know, the Bible is divided between the Old Testament and the New Testament. In the very last book of the Old Testament, it's the book of Malachi. It's got 4 chapters. In the 3rd chapter, I think it's verse 8 through 11 or 9 through 11. It talks about the law of tithing, that people need to bring tithing, and tithing infers a tenth. Like you bring a tenth of your Mormons basically give a tenth of their income to the church every year, like at all times. And if you don't, you're robbing God. And if you rob God, you're fucked. But that's what it says in the Bible. If you rob God, if you don't pay your tithing, you're fucked. Love Malachi. Well, here comes Jesus, New Testament. But anyway, so there is a money structure, which is 10%. There's 15 million Mormons, and let's say 20% of them pay tithing. It's a lot of money. You know, Mormons have a lot of money. So there was the money thing, but like the money thing is you give money. You don't ever get money, right? You just give the money, yeah. And yeah, the scene I'm trying to tell you about was or that I'm thinking of is my mom said you can go and you can go and perform. You don't have to be a missionary. I said no, I want to be a missionary, but I really wanted to perform. And then when I was a missionary, I took 5 juggling balls. I didn't take very much. You're not supposed to take very much. It's very Spartan. And our mission president, who was our immediate spiritual authority, and he was an authority. Like God could speak to him so that he could speak to us on God's behalf. That's how Mormon authority works. God speaks to somebody, that person speaks to you. And if there's nobody above you, you can also speak to God directly just for your own life. Or if you're a father, for your family's life, or if you're a bishop, for the congregation, or et cetera, et cetera. In the case of missionaries, missionaries are clumped all around the world, and each clump has a mission president who can speak to God on behalf of any one of those missionaries. And our mission president was a total sociopath. It's from South Carolina, from Raleigh. Is that North or South Carolina? I think it's South. And he was from Raleigh, whichever one of the Carolinas. And he was always going on about obeying with exactness. He used some obscure Book of Mormon verse, and like where these soldiers in this one army, they obeyed with exactness, and so they were just these young kids, and they killed all the bad guys, and none of them got killed because they did everything with exactness. And so he said, "Is your heart 100% true to the Lord, Elder Bonnici? Da 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 da. Send your stuff home." And so I sent my juggling balls home, and I remember dressed up like a 50s business person with a tie, putting these 5 balls in a little box and just weeping, like just weeping as I wrote the address. And I sent them home. And then 2 years later, I went home and opened up that little box and started juggling again, and it came back quick. But
did you feel satisfied when you went home?
Did I feel
satisfied?
Satisfied with having been a missionary? Yeah, like, being a missionary within Mormon culture is sort of like, Mormonism has this weird, like Abrahamic or like monotheistic mythology, which is kind of refracted through like 19th century, early 1800s American like individualism. Like it's a pretty weird, twisted sort of mishmash of culture and history. And as it existed when I was a missionary, I came home in the year 2001, and missionaries are sort of like these kind of superheroes. Sort of, it's like you go on a mission, and it's like you're going on a quest, like on this really cool spiritual quest. And so you leave your family behind, and you can talk to your family twice a year. You can write letters once a week, and you can talk to your family twice a year, on Mother's Day and on Christmas. That's it. And so So you don't see your family, so you're kind of starved for your family, and you don't see all this congregation, but they're all kind of cheering you on, and sometimes they even write you letters, you know, and send you cookies. And so when I got home, I was very well received when I got home, and I got to tell all these, you know, superpowered, like superhero stories of divine intervention and, you know, Jesus leading us and us finding these people in despair and lifting up their spirits and baptizing them and doing this and the other thing. There was all these, you know, neat stories, and so I was able to share those stories. But I remember
just before we move, am I right in thinking that you were the top recruiter? Was this at this point you'd had some kind of success? You'd done better than other people within the church for this.
So the top recruiter, no, there's I baptized a lot of people when I was a missionary. In Utah, I had a lot of help. You know, Utah has a political like situation that lends itself to baptizing people, which is that everybody's Mormon. Like when you show up in Utah, one of the things you're going to notice is there's a lot of 7-Elevens and there's a lot of Mormon churches. Like they're everywhere, right? And there's a lot of people on Sundays, like thousands of people going to these churches every Sunday. And if you didn't know what Mormonism was, you certainly do when you get there, you know? And politically, it's important for the church in Utah to indoctrinate and baptize and harass the incoming neighbors to join the church because they want to keep the political balance of power, you know? So as it stands, I hope to God it's slipping now. But when I was there, it was sort of like 50-50. Like half of the Salt Lake Valley. Salt Lake City is surrounded by mountains, more or less. Like to north and south, there's canyons that go on to other valleys. But yeah, when I was there, it was very important that we baptize everybody who came from California or from Arizona to make sure that there was enough Mormons to keep all the political decision making with the church. So we had a lot of help, like a lot of very organized help. And if Mormons are anything, they're good at organizing. So anyway, that said, I baptized somebody every week I was there, which is about 2.5 times the average. Again, Mormons are also very calculating. But to say I was the top recruiter isn't true. There's other missionaries who similarly baptized a lot of people.
Do you think there was there something about you that made you 2.5 times better than the average to do that? Was it
doing handstands up and down stairs?
Yeah. So were you performing at the same time? Were you this cool Mormon kind of character?
Kind of, yes and no. Like the way that I dealt with the conflict between wanting to be this flamboyant, hyperactive person and being a circumspect 1950s business person with a lot of Jesus knowledge was by going really, really far on the Jesus side. And so my psychopath mission president, his name is James Stephen, and he's probably dead. I hope he's dead. I don't know if I hope. No, I probably do. I don't care. If he's dead, I'm happy to know he's dead, but I didn't kill him, is what I'm trying to say. Okay, it wasn't me. If he's dead, I'd be happy to know he's dead. I don't know. I'm not sure what I'm saying about him. His name is James Stephen. He was a sociopath. And I went along with his thing, like do everything right. Like don't, basically do everything right. So I held myself to this excruciating mental, like it was like a mental crucible, you know? And, but when I was out there doing the work, as we would call it, which is harassing people in their homes, I would do anything I needed to in order to proclaim the gospel, perfect the saints, you know, like to get people involved. And charisma goes a long way. You know, you sit down with people in their home, like, and it's kind of like a street show, but at the end, they commit 10% of their income indefinitely to the church, and they commit not to drink or smoke or drink coffee or have impure thoughts or have sex outside of marriage, and to become part of this fairly exciting, but certainly powerful community of neighbors who are nepotistic and kind of self-congratulating, but also welcoming to anybody coming in, you know? And so it's kind of like a street show, you know, like you learn the right things to say, learn little twists, like you twist the right knob and you get someone to cry and then they have a spiritual experience and they say yes, you know?
And
So,
how do you feel about creating that spiritual experience then, now that you don't seem to be in the same sense of belief?
For one, I think it's interesting. Yeah, I think it's. I don't know if I can do this right now, but I can do it. I just don't know if you can see it. Can you see if I like? I can. Yeah, just 1 second. I'm gonna try to give myself goosebumps. Okay. I just don't know if you're gonna be able to see them.
I think you can see it. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you see it? I'm trying harder now.
I think I can see goosebumps. I'm not the picture quality is not perfect, but I think I can. But please go on. So how do you give yourself goosebumps?
Now, where I learned that I could give myself goosebumps was another one of those episodes where I thought, I'm probably not going to be a Mormon forever, right? Or when I look back, that thought might have been covered by a whole bunch of bullshit, but it was in there, like the inner integrity of my inner born human free spirit child was in there saying, like, get me out. And one of the instances where I learned I could do that. So Mormonism, or being a missionary, part of the experience of being a missionary is meeting with other missionaries and sharing notes, like how to do things in order to get people to join the church. And there's some pretty insidious stuff, but a lot of it is just like sales, like workshops, you know. And so at one of those meetings, a friend of mine, another missionary who came into the mission at the same time as me, every 6 weeks, there's a new bunch of missionaries come in and a bunch of missionaries go out, so that you're there for 2 years, and the missionary, it cycles. So he and I were there with new missionaries that we were in charge of teaching how to be missionaries toward the end of the mission, or toward the end of my mission and his mission. We came and left at the same time. Elder Henry from San Diego. Incidentally, I saw him in Covent Garden. I was sitting down having a coffee one time at Covent Garden, typing on my computer, and I looked up, and it was Dan Henry. And whereas I've been smoking and drinking and partying, he'd only just finished puberty still. It was like 2 years ago. He was another reason for another part of the Mormon appeal is everyone's youthful and really healthy. Not everyone, but many. Anyway, I saw him, but it was him, the same guy. We were singing a song, and then he got goosebumps, and I noticed, and I said, "Hey, what's up with the goosebumps?" And he said, "Oh, I just get them every time I feel the Spirit." And then I said, "Oh, now I do too. I remember that thought. Now I do too." And then I got goosebumps. And then at some point, after leaving the church, I realized that it was just a mental trick. And so when I do that, it's like I kind of put myself in the same situation where I'm feeling the presence of God, and I can just make it happen.
It's like the actor's trick of thinking about something which made you feel deeply upset to induce the crying.
Yeah.
I get it. So you go back from all of this, because I could talk to you about this all night long. I really could. But I feel like we need to move on because you've got a lot more interesting stuff that's happened in your life since then.
Yeah.
So you go back and you get the 5 balls out of the box.
Yeah.
And you pick the balls up.
Yeah. So that happened. So after my mission in 2001, the sequence of performing events went like this. I didn't go back to busking directly. What I did go to was motivational speaking. So I had been a missionary, and because I was a missionary in Utah, whereas in Canada, if you're a missionary, there's 2 pairs of missionaries for a church, and then a whole bunch of heathen non-believers to bring to the fold. Yeah. The futility of Mormonism is super hilarious, right? Like the goal is to teach every human person on earth and bring every human person into the Mormon fold, like everybody. Like imagine like Muslims, Saudi Arabia, them too. Like eventually, there's some Mormons who are scheming with intention and like political sort of like cunning and trying to figure out how to get the missionaries into Saudi Arabia. Like at this moment, that's happening. Anyway, in Utah, it was the exact opposite. There was 2 missionaries and way too many Mormons for us to actually meet them all. So on any given Sunday, we'd have like 16 different churches within our jurisdiction, right? And so everywhere I went, I kept on getting speaking engagements so that we could be the missionaries who are kind of like superheroes, like mythologized superheroes. And I would just give talks. So every Sunday, like 2-3 talks. And so
can I get you to move into frame a tiny bit, mate? Thanks.
Oh yeah, sorry. So we give these talks, and so I was practicing because I had this goal of being a speaker when I got home. So I got home and I went to my principal. I said, hey, what's his name? Dave Mernon. I said, hey, Mr. Mernon. And he said, oh, you can call me Dave because I'm not your principal anymore. I said, hey, Dave, listen, I got back from my missionary thing. Could I come and speak to the students? And I had been the student council president under the same man. And so he said, is it going to be religious? I said, no. That's what I want to do now. And
Mike,
he said,
have you ever seen this guy break up?
Jeg skal bare snakke med min ven her.
Yeah.
Hey everybody, this is my father-in-law. Would you say hi to...
Hi. Have you ever seen a gay? You just jump out now.
I don't think I understand.
It sounds like you're having fun in your household.
Yeah, that's my father-in-law, Vince John. Anyway, so I told Mr. Mernon, I'm not going to speak about Jesus or anything or get the kids baptized, but I do want to give these talks. And he said, okay, you can speak to the grade 8s, and if it goes well, you can speak to the grade 7s. And if that goes well, you can speak to the grade 9s. And it all went well. And then I spoke to another school, and I started a school speaking business that lasted quite a few years. So that's how I got back into performing, how I kind of leveraged my Mormon experience. But then that summer, the school's out of season, and Canada Day was coming. And in Canada, in my experience, Canada Day, July the 1st, is sort of like busker Christmas. Like, you know, hundreds of thousands, a million people come onto the streets in Ottawa, the capital. And there's a lot of big, wide North American streets. And we would just busk. Like, I did 11 shows there one time, like 11 shows on one day.
But
and
at this point, you must be fairly rusty at this point, though, because you've been public speaking. You've not been doing shows for many, many years by the sounds.
No, so public speaking, like there's a part of public speaking which is like stand-up comedy. Like when you're just talking, no props, naked on the stage, not naked, but propless. Yeah. There is something that's interesting. Like, anybody knows it's way easier to perform on a stage than it is on a street. Like by a factor of 10 or 20, you know? Like when you're on a stage and everyone's looking the same direction at you, just the social contagion reality of that, you know? Like just that gives you, like, amplifies your personality and amplifies your presence and power, you know, tremendously. So yes, I was rusty. I was speaking a lot, and that's, you know, jokes and charisma, and I would do some tricks in my speaking work too. But yeah, when it came to July, I remember having this real crisis. I also started going to university when I got back. Mormons are very much go to university, get married, have kids, like be professionals. And so I was going to university, speaking, and then the summer came. I wasn't in university, I wasn't speaking, and I just yearned for it. You know, I just wanted to perform so badly, like street perform. Like street performing is a different category. It uses the word perform, but it's this different thing, right? It's like a public engagement, and I wanted it, and it's a public free engagement too, and it's you know, self-directed. At any rate, so yeah, I did. I wanted to perform. I had a 5-foot unicycle and all my juggling crap, and a speaker, and a microphone, and I went and I did it. Now I have to take like a 1-minute hiatus because I need to get my my plug, or else the computer is going to die.
Yeah, you go. Run, get your stuff. Yeah. Cool. No worries. So I was desperate not to move on from talking about the church. I find it fascinating. I find the idea of Mike as a young performer being inside of this kind of encapsulated ideology, functioning obviously to a high level inside of the ideology, while at the same time performing and using all the skills within that ideology then to move out and perform. And when you chat to him, I can't help but believe that he's had an incredibly beneficial life from being inside that environment, despite the fact that when you hear him talk about it, it has a lot of problems. But he's intelligent, he's articulate, he's balanced, reasonably healthy. He was outgoing, educated, together. Yeah, complicated, different, good things, bad things for everything. You're back. So you go out, you perform, you're at Canada Day.
Yeah.
You get your 5-foot unicycle, you've got your clubs, you've got your mic, you've got your speaker. You go out to work that day.
It was heavenly. It was better than everything else I was doing. It was the best thing that could have happened. Yeah, it was wonderful. And then from there, because of the conflict of Mormonism, that conflict between performing and not performing, it's almost never been resolved. Like it kind of is always, it's ongoing. Not more recently, but actually, even recently, it's kind of ongoing. But every time I return to performing, it's like a whole bunch of serendipity shines and a bunch of little things fall into place. Okay, if he says. That was one example of many where I came back to performing. I did that Canada Day. I got some gigs that summer. I kept busy, kept performing, and then I was doing the speaking thing again. Yeah.
So the school season starts again, so you can do the school speaking, right? Yeah. And are you using performance to fill the gap at this moment? It's not like you want to dedicate yourself to doing street performance. You're doing street performance because in the summer you can't do the school gigs, the public speaking.
That is an astute question, young man.
Thank you.
That's a good question. Yeah, kind of. Yeah. I started doing so speaking gigs, there's that sort of category of performer who's like really uncomfortable saying busker about themselves. Like it's like they're busking, but they want to construct this whole other world where what they're doing isn't busking. It's like, listen, I am busking, but I'm also educated, so I'm actually a street performer. In fact, I'm a theater performer who happens to be performing outside right now, and I don't have any other gigs. Okay, and it's the only thing that I have going for me. Okay, but I am educated, and I'm not a loser. Okay, like, you know what? That weird like brainiac nonsense that happens. I did that for a number of years, but what ended up happening was that after I dusted off the street thing, I started getting gigs where I would book gigs for speaking, and I would book gigs for corporate work, and then I would do festivals kind of in there. Yeah. So I got to be fairly busy performing as well, but not busy like when you're a street performer doing multiple shows a day or a week. I would be performing once a week or twice a week, like gigging.
Were you happy?
Was I happy at that time? In a way, I was happy. Like I had all the trappings of happiness, and so I had the appearance of happiness, and then I had that Mormon thing that was constraining my mind and trying to push it in a way that looked through that narrow window of life and saw this, like this effervescent beauty, and I could sort of project that beauty to sort of pretend that it was real. But was I happy? No, I wasn't really happy. No, I was in deep crisis and conflict.
And so what happens after this then? This obviously doesn't sustain because now you're living in Denmark, you're studying, doing a master's, I believe, right now, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you obviously didn't maintain this life in Canada.
So what happened with that? Well, a few things happened before it all broke down. So by this time, so I started that speaking thing that I described in November of 2001. And that grew and grew and grew until 2006. And in that time, I was gigging and doing performance gigs, doing festivals occasionally, and doing a lot of schools, like 100 a year, 120 at the height of it. And in there, I got married in the Mormon tradition of marriage.
Were you in love?
Yeah. Was I in love? Yeah, the woman I married was, and I'm sure she still is, very wonderful. She was very wonderful. She was a wonderful, beautiful person. And you know when two people have similar problems, how it's the most irritating thing, right? Like if two people have the exact same problems, they're the same person. But if two people's problems are totally like, yeah, out to lunch, like there's no mutual claim on each other, you know, like, no, actually you're kind of interpreting that wrong because you're too close to me, so don't interpret, you know, like that weird friction. If two people are like this, there's no problem, right? You never bump into people from across the room. It's only when you're close, you know? We were kind of like that. Like she was in conflict about Mormonism. Everybody's in conflict about Mormonism because it's a fairy tale and because it's like a super costly, like demanding fairy tale that doesn't keep its promises. And so you have to do a lot of really fucked up, contorted mental gymnastics in order to make that work. And so she was doing that and I was doing that, and she succeeded, and I'm not sure if she still succeeded, but she succeeded at the time. And when I finally broke free, she wasn't ready, willing, or able to do that, and so she didn't, and that's why we split up.
And this was in 2006, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So during that period,
what sparked it? Why did you want to move away from it? If it's too personal, we can move on, mate. It's okay. You know, we don't have to.
Listen, you asked me to bring my dick out here. I'm going to show you some sort of like dick dancing. Like you ask me whatever you want, cowboy. You and your mustache can talk to my spirit any which way you want.
There you go. So why then? Why'd you leave it?
Yeah. So ultimately the reason I left it is because it's like self-respect finally emerged, or like out of some sort of desperation, like the two me's. Like the one in me that I was born, like, you know, my body, if you shrink it and back in time, it stays real the whole time. Like it's continuous. This other Mormon in me was the superimposition, you know, and the superimposition.
Was there a spark? Was there an event which made you think? Okay,
there was a few. Again, this is something I've reflected upon a lot. So if I have a prepared answer, that's why. But there's three things primarily that I thought about in order to excuse myself from the church. In order to, it was almost like I left the church on the church's terms. Actually, in a very real case, I did. Like I kind of twisted Mormonism against itself to say, like, to point out some of its contradictions, you know. So one of them is you know, people sometimes talk about the names of God. God has all these names, you know, like Jehovah, Elohim, God, Jesus, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, like Prince of Peace, like there's all these names in the Bible that just mean God, yeah. And so for me, the Prince of Peace one was prominent. So right before I left my mission in Utah, and like, if you can imagine, Utah is very much a red state. Like Utah is very Republican. Utah has a lot of very educated people because Mormonism presses education. It's got, like, Salt Lake City has like 100 languages spoken because all the, you know, young heroes go out to be missionaries in other parts of the world, and they come back fluent in all these languages. One of the things that Utah does with its multiculturalism and education is make a lot of missiles to go and send to the places where those people had gone and loved people and got them into the church. You know, they come back home, they get, you know, big degrees in physics and make missiles.
Missionaries and missiles.
Yeah, missionaries and missiles.
Yeah.
Here's a weird little story that exemplifies that. I was out in Harriman, Utah, which is in the southeast corner of the Salt Lake Valley. Harriman, it's called. They have a distinctive accent, even though it's the same valley. They would say, my horse was born in a barn, by which they would mean my horse was born in a barn. Anyway, in the southeast corner of the valley, it is the foothills and then the mountains themselves. Okay, they're called the Ochre Mountains on the west side of the Salt Lake Valley. And me and my missionary companion drove up. In Utah, all the missionaries, like not all of them, but many missionaries had cars. So I spent my whole time as a missionary in this tiny little place, like 1.5 miles by 1 mile wide, driving around in a car. In this case, in Harriman, my area was quite a bit bigger, and it included the mountains. So we drove up into the mountains to the home of a gentleman whose last name was Bishop, and he was also the ecclesiastical leader of the congregation, which very hilariously and inconveniently also granted him the title bishop. So he was known as Bishop.
Bishop, yeah.
Yeah, Bishop. So we went to Bishop's house, and this was one of the cliques. Again, I can remember the scene. I can remember the scene of all the craziness in my past. There's these scenes that stick out, you know. I think of this like when you climb a mountain and the clouds come in, but there's few mountain peaks, you know, and those mountain peaks are sort of like the stepping stones of your life or some story. And this is another one of those. So we're sitting, he had a very, very beautiful house looking over the whole valley and the trees and the mountain. And I was like, so Bishop, what do you do? And he said, oh, well, I'm a rocket scientist. It's like, oh, cool. Do you work for NASA? And he said, oh, no. There's no NASA outposts here. And then I said, oh, you're a fucking killer, you piece of fucking dog meat. And I remember the rage, like the Prince of Peace. This guy was an ecclesiastical leader. This is the guy who interviewed people to assess their worthiness. And he was making like the weapons of war and destruction. And I remember just like being filled with disgust for this rich man in his nice house with his nice looking kids. You know, everything's great. And he's a fucking killer. I didn't say fucking at the time because you're not allowed. But so that was one. And then shortly thereafter, half a year later, 9/11 happened when I was a missionary. And then I went home, and the aftermath of 9/11, well, we're still in the aftermath. You know, we're in the aftermath of all of history, I suppose. But
well, we're in the direct aftermath. There's direct consequences which are still playing out now from that event.
Yeah, certainly. And so when like I was thinking about Utah, I was thinking about the church. I was back in Canada trying to figure out what to do with my life, getting into school, and watching very closely how the church related to what happened next. And many people won't remember this, but some might. But shortly after 9/11, George Bush called together a meeting of all the religious leaders in America, and he invited the Mormon prophet. You know, red state Utah, you can imagine that's politically significant. And President Gordon B. Hinckley, who was the prophet, seer, and revelator of the church, he was shown on the church newspaper, which is called Church News, shaking hands with George Bush, and the caption was, "We are with you." And I was like, well, we're sending bombs? Like, what's going on? Like, what's going on with is there a bomb in Iraq, or are they doing, like, is Saddam Hussein doing nuclear weapons, or what the hell is going on? And all the Utahns, as I was leaving, they were all arming themselves and getting ready to go to war. And I was like, but Jesus, like, Prince of Peace, right? Like, what's going on? Where's the Prince of Peace here? Like the Church of Jesus Christ, the Church of Peace. What's this war shit? And so that was the big one. That was one big one. And then I was going to university. That was one. To answer the question, what were the things that led to my ultimate leaving of the church? That was one. The second one happened when I was in university. I went to a very lefty school called Trent University. It had been known for being like sort of a queer enclave in sort of like conservative-y central Ontario, not really deeply urban Toronto or Montreal, like middle Canada, you know, middle and nowhere Canada. But my school was a real queer-focused community place, and so there's a lot of gay action going on. And in all of that, I was challenged to consider my perspective on homosexuality. The church has tried, embarrassingly, to become both like inwardly and deeply doctrinally opposed to homosexuality, but like outwardly socially sort of polite in principle. But at the time, they weren't doing the polite thing. They were actively antagonizing homosexuality at every turn. And I couldn't put that together. I was like, you know, who fucking cares? I think Jesus is probably gay now. You know, if Jesus was around, him and John, I think John the Beloved, I think John the homo, you know, John the homo boyfriend. And anyway, so that was another one. I couldn't stand the idea that Mormonism was like aggressively opposed to people's integrity and love. And then the third one, just after I got married, I was married for 2.5 years, for a year and a half before I left the church, and then a year just by virtue of the law of divorce. I had to stay married even though we were separated. But during that year and a half when I was married in Toronto, still performing, still speaking, I was also in charge of the young men in the church. It's one of the positions. Every Mormon has a job to do. Nobody gets paid, but everyone does something, and they give 10% of their money, and the church does something with that money somewhere. But I was in charge of these young men, and all of them were immigrants, and all of them were in pretty desperate economic situations. And I was their teacher, so I would be teaching lessons, preparing lessons. And the Mormon Church has divided up the doctrines of the creator of the universe, has divided up the teachings that he wants to bestow upon his mortal children, you know, in their tabernacle of clay, you know, into 72 distinct principles. Okay, so there's these 72 lessons that just get recycled in Mormon teaching every time you go to church. And as their teacher, I was supposed to once a week go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, and I couldn't do it. I became unable to teach lessons saying, if you do this, your life will be better. If you do this, your life will be better. If you do this, your life will be better, which is what Mormonism teaches. You know, suffer now, and in the future there's heaven, and in the future there's a blessing. But for these kids,
you lost confidence in that.
Yeah, I couldn't teach it. The only lesson I kept on recycling was Jesus said, love everyone. And then eventually I couldn't teach that anymore, you know, because the church wasn't loving everyone. And so those three things, being unable to teach these people that, particularly it was the idea that they needed to overcome sin. I couldn't bring myself to teach them that they were sinners, that they were in need of repair, that they were inadequate spiritually, you know. I couldn't do that. So there was the need for the atonement, which presupposes some sort of spiritual inadequacy. I couldn't impose that upon the young men who I knew and loved. I couldn't be part of the hatefulness against homosexuals, and I couldn't sanction the idea of the church supporting vicious wars. And so those things together prompted me to say, I gotta go. I gotta get out of here. And I figured that out in 2006 in October. Actually, also in university. These thoughts were happening in university, like the homosexual thoughts, particularly because of the nature of the school I was in. But yeah, they were compiling. They were causing a lot of tension between me and my wife. And eventually I realized I don't want to be a Mormon anymore. I said it in my head, and then I called my mom. I said it out loud. And then she said, you need to go talk to my wife, to your wife. And so I went and I talked to my wife. And I'm not naming her out of respect for her.
Yeah.
And so I went and I said, I don't want to be a Mormon anymore. And a week later, her parents lived in Calgary. They flew over. They took a whole bunch of our stuff from our house, put it in a car, and she drove away. I never saw her again. A week after that, we never spoke again. We spoke once after that. And that was it. And then I was free to become whatever it is that Dynamike is failing to become.
Did you feel free at that time? Did you feel like it was a liberation?
No, I felt like it was liberating in the way that a hurricane is liberating, like a tornado. Yeah, I can't. I can now because I've pieced it together. But the next 3 years were this blur. Where did this happen here, or did it happen over there? Or where was I when this happened? Or like, which was first, or who was I with? I couldn't put it together.
Was it a blur because it was hedonistic? It was you indulging all the things that you might have denied yourself in the previous years of your life.
Yeah, that sounds fun and spicy in a way that my experience wasn't fun and spicy. There was periods of that, you know, like yeah, there was periods of that, but no, mostly it was anguish. Yeah, mostly it was. Yeah, a lot of the reason that people stay religious, or a lot of the reason that people hold to any, like, there's so many ideas that most of humanity is still holding to, which will be out of fashion in 50 years. And the reason we hold to them now, all of us, not just me as a stupid Mormon, or the stupid Mormons who are still stupid Mormons, or any other religious weirdo. But, you know, like capitalism, like how compelling of an idea is that if it wasn't for the fact that everybody subscribes, you know? Like, you know, money is the thing that we're doing with all this technology. Money is the best way for us to interact and transact between ourselves and organize and cooperate. Like, come on. But anyway, one of the reasons I think, I can't speak for everyone. One of the reasons that I stayed with it is because of the recognition, the certain recognition, or at least the expectation that if I were to take the step out of it, like the world would be different enough that it wouldn't be familiar, and then I would be, adrift.
And it sounds like you were adrift for a few years, but it also,
Yeah.
I know, because knowing you now, that you're not necessarily in the same way adrift now. So how did you find your way out of this then?
I'm certainly still adrift. But
But
I'm
you-
adrift in a way that everyone's adrift. We're on a planet.
Yeah.
We're circling the sun. The sun's freaking out around the center of the galaxy, and the galaxy's unfolding from some sort of strange cosmic beginning. We're all in that situation. I'm adrift now with the rest of humanity, which is kind of nice. Whereas before I was this self-congratulating peculiarity in the cosmos with a bunch of weirdos.
But you said that for 3 years you couldn't place things together. You definitely seem to, at least from hearing it, section those 3 years off as being different from the years that followed after.
Yeah. So in those 3 years, I bounced around a lot. I was all over the place. Like, speaking was fairly lucrative. I ended up buying a house in Toronto, and which was insane now. Like, the way that my financial circumstances have turned out in the interim, it's like the idea of buying a house. Like, if I can buy a sandwich, it's a good day, But I bought a house, and then in our divorce, that was partitioned. But I still had enough money to buy a car, like a new car, right, a used car. I bought a Toyota Prius to be a progressive, green, post-Christian asshole, and I bought another house in my hometown, but I couldn't be there. Like, it was too haunted with the past, and so I went and stayed with my buddy, the guy who carried around the pot. When I first started busking, I went and stayed with him and his wife all the time. And then I went and I got an apartment in Toronto at a circus over top of the Zero Gravity Circus. And they opened their arms to me in spite of all of my crazy weirdness, which is very nice. And I met a group of friends who I still cherish. And
so what was your experience like when you first went there? You say they opened their arms to you. So how was the introductions to this?
Well, I was already a performer, and I was already pretty hot on the street. Like, even when I was a Mormon, I was doing pretty big shows. And in fact, it was sort of like channeled chaos, right? Like, it was me opening a little crack in myself and letting all the fucking weird out, but it was focused, and it was also constrained in ways that, North American culture and polite corporatism sort of endorses, So I was doing fairly well for myself. And so they knew that, and they also thought it was interesting. I was leaving Mormonism, and they were happy about it. And so when I came in, and it's like, I didn't know any of the music they knew. Right? We grew up in the same plays at the same time, but there was all the music that I missed because I wasn't supposed to listen to it, right? Or all the movies that I didn't see. And so I was this peculiarity, but I was interesting, and I was certainly interested in them.
Was it almost a bit like a guy that's melted out of the ice, and they brought him into their home and gone, look at all of these things?
Yeah. And some of those things are really some of the fun things. Like, I had a delayed adolescence. I was 26, and I got to do adolescence 10 years late. And that was a lot of fun, and I think like that was fun. But in between the fun were these periods of, ongoing real despair and confusion, for sure. But so eventually,
it sounds like they nurtured you through that.
Yeah, they nurtured me, and if not nurtured me, they, like all of us, we're all wandering around, bouncing off the walls, and they were doing that, but we were doing it together. And my friends in Toronto, I just love them to death. And the larger community, around those friendships, the same. I just love them to death.
Did your craft develop during that time? Did you get more circus experience? Did you work with them there, or?
Yeah, like, when I was a teenager training as a gymnast, like, I don't know, like, I'm 40 now and I'm a bit chubby, but I feel like with 3 months of training, I could get my body pretty tight and strong. But when I was 26, it was like 2 minutes of training, like do 3 jumping jacks, and then all of a sudden I'm on fire. And so I got in pretty good shape pretty quickly by being at the circus, like they're training and jumping around and partying, I'm partying exuberantly, like with a lot of dancing for, 15 hours straight. That'll do a lot for your cardiovascular.
Yes.
So yeah, we, yes and no. And then also though, whereas that focus cracked, you know, like like if humor is based on tension, you know, like here's the status quo and you pull the string a little bit and people say, whoa, and then you let it go and it slaps them back in the face and say, hey, there you go, back to normal. But hey, remember that's over there. I was the other way. I was like way over here trying to figure out some sort of way back to the status quo, which I had abandoned. And so for a while, I remember there was one artist who saw me perform in Vancouver, and he was like, you know, an artist I really respect. He's like, I don't really think the audience understood what you were doing in there. And I was like, oh, yeah, I don't know, maybe. And then my knee-jerk reaction was to say, well, hey, listen, go fuck yourself. You go do, you know, go do whatever the fuck you want to do. I'll do my own thing. But at the same time, I respect that he told me that. Because for a while, you know, I was just like awash in trying to undo the mischief of not just undo it, but even recognize all these knotted, crazy peculiarities of myself.
Were you being very cerebral in your work?
Sometimes, and then sometimes just like really crass, you know, as I was trying to like, you know, like get rid of the idea that I had to be circumspect just by not being circumspect, you know?
So you were experimenting, almost testing out your interactions in the world through the show.
Yeah, certainly, yeah. And like for a long time, I was doing my shows in my underpants, you know, like Mormonism. Like, I think this. I told some artists this one time, and I remember that they were. One of the artists said thank you afterwards, which I thought was nice. But like, where does the religious vitality come from? You know, all these dead sins and like if you look at religious experience, the religion.
I can't hear you. I can't hear you, buddy. So you sort that out. I'll keep chatting for this. So I find it very interesting, this desire and need to figure out the world in a show, and I think it's something that I've done similarly in my own life. Is that for different reason you don't feel like a member of society. You don't feel like you're in step with the world. You feel dislocated, and then during your show, you can experiment and test with that, and you can look at people who you wouldn't meet normally, you wouldn't socialize normally, and you can I hear you yet?
I think so.
Oh, excellent. Yeah. So I'll just finish this point really, really quickly. So you can experiment and test in those shows and put ideas out and put interactions out and create circumstances where you can personally learn and understand the world better. And I found it fascinating you're doing that. Please carry on, buddy.
Okay, where were we just then?
So you were talking about some group of artists when you were talking about performing in your underwear.
Yeah. So I have many photographs of myself in this pair of green Speedos. They were given to me by my older sister Jess as a Christmas present. And it got to the point where I had to retire them, unfortunately, because no matter how much I washed them, as soon as a drop of sweat got back onto them, it reanimated all of that murky bacterial filth into like a pungency, which was compelling to say the least. You know.
Yeah.
And so I put them on, you know, coughed, and then all of a sudden I smelled like a garbage bin, full of like sex and terror.
Oh, lovely. So why did you wear them? Why were you going out performing in your underwear?
Yeah, the point was the vitality of where does the vitality of religion come from? All these performances, all this activity, all this physical activity, right? Like these ritualized behaviors. And the play, like religion doctrinally talks a lot about the afterlife, right? And the conditions of entering a happy afterlife. So delaying the value of your life until death, but there's no vitality there. The vitality comes from sex, right? Like if you get a fire, right, you have a fire, right? But if you channel the fire through a bunch of interesting combustion chambers, you have a jet engine, you know? And so Mormonism does that, you know, like as soon as I turned 12, they were on me, you know, like sexuality thoughts, sexuality behavior, sexuality words, like everything sex. And so they take the sex and they channel it into their devices, as it were. And And
when you talk about channel, they channel the tension and energy that would come from that, the frustration, and I understand what you mean.
Yeah. And so when you see missionaries, these young virile adolescents, out there on their bikes, knocking on doors, they're saying basically like, "Fucking hump me, please! Like, please hump me! Like, I need a hump." But what they say is, "Jesus loves you. We need 10% of your income. Are you feeling seduced?" And the people don't know why they're saying yes, but there's sexuality there, right? Like there's sexual energy. And
do you think it's necessarily just that they want to be humped, but it's that they want to feel closeness and personalness with someone, and want to feel loved?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so they're using the concept of Jesus as a medium to try and convey that question.
Yeah, I very much. Yeah, like sexuality isn't the only human driver, but it's a strong one.
Yeah, very much. Well, love is also tied into sexuality. You
right.
Can't deny those two things.
Yeah,
but please carry on. Underwear in the show, and the reason you're doing this.
So, like, part of learning to reclaim myself was to reclaim that part of myself. It was like the sexual, like I remember being so viciously angry about the sexual experiences I didn't have in high school. With I told you about my girlfriend. Like I dated a lot of, like, I've been very blessed to have the beautiful company of very wonderful women in my life, and the lost opportunities, I was viciously angry about it, and so the underwear thing was me getting my sexuality out in the open, and it was uncomfortable and it was awkward, but it was also funny, and also it like, Mormons aren't the only sexually repressed humans in the world.
Of course, well, everybody's sexually repressed to some extent, and I'm sure that's why for your audience there's some sense of catharsis of watching this person be over the top with it, and push it further than anyone normally would, because you have been like a spring, compressed for so long.
Mm-hmm.
And they get to experience that without having to go through all the hardship, the trouble, and the jeopardy.
That's right. And one of the things I love about you, Matt, and your work is that I guess that sexual repression might not, I'm not gonna guess, but I would guess that your sexual repression wasn't as enforced, and so you're able to be more sexually suggestive with your mustache.
Oh, thank you very much. I do my best. Facial hair says a lot. So as much as I love hearing about me, today's about you. So I'm gonna pull us back. So you're in Canada, you're in your underwear, you're performing, you've lived above the circus, you're kind of rediscovering yourself. So what's really the next step for you here?
Well, part of rediscovering myself, you mentioned it earlier, like, was it just like a hedonism shit show? You didn't say shit show, but you talked about hedonism. And as I became more comfortable in the circus community, like, hedonism is a very, like, not maybe central, but it's close to the center of the circus in general, like the circus ethic. Like, how cool can we be? How far can we go? Like, how far can we stretch this thing, physically or spiritually? And so the hedonism, like sex, drugs, and rock and roll, became prominent. And at one point, they became a little too prominent. And in this one December, I was living in this loft with actually Dan Nemo. God bless that man. Like, God, like the Mormon, God bless him, and the other gods. But whatever like vainglorious reaction I retain from the Mormon gods, I would like them to bless Daniel Nemo for his beauty. But we lived together in this loft, and he helped me through. He helped me just by being kind and considerate, like recognizing that I was crazy, but also like kind of being crazy himself, and also just being kind.
And so was this specifically to do with the fact that you were reaching the sort of a critical point? The wheels potentially were going to fall off the cart through this unchecked, exploration.
Yeah, and he's a little bit older than me, but he's quite a bit bigger than me. Like, he's a big, imposing, like, strong Australian man. And we were roommates, and I just love him so much, this guy. And anyway, in this one winter when we were living together, like, things got scarce, like money was tight. It's hard to bust when it's -25. And the reality of -25 is something I'm very anxious to forget, even though it happens, like it's happening in Toronto right now. And so, I was already coming to Edinburgh. And so, going to the UK, doing festival gigs, making money, and then spending it like just as fast. And then winter comes and it's like, oh, fuck, I'm fucked. Anyway, in that situation where I was fucked one winter, my brother called me and said, hey, I'm getting married tomorrow. And I was like, what the hell? Like, I thought you were getting married in April. He said, yeah, but there's his wife is Chinese heritage, and there's something about the Chinese zodiac that had some sort of like bad omen after a certain date, and so she wanted to get married before the Chinese New Year. So this was I can't remember if it was December or January. I guess it was January of 2010. And so I was like, well, Phil, listen, I'm your brother. I need to be there when you're married. And he said, okay, well, get on the flight right now because we're getting married tomorrow. I was like, okay, well, can I have some money? Because I don't have any money. And he said, yeah, sure. And he sent me the cash. And then I went, and then very conveniently, Vancouver was playing host to the Olympics. And the DVIA, or the Downtown Vancouver Business Improvement Association, had decided to create a street event in their downtown because the action was everywhere else. And so they basically just made a free-for-all, like the Fringe, like on the main street downtown. And I went and I busked it, and busted hard in my underpants and made a bunch of cash. And then from then was busking continuously for the next long time.
And that's Canada. Is that in Canada, or are you traveling and doing that at the same time?
That was the Olympics. That was in January, February. In March, I busked in Vancouver. I don't know if I went back. No, I would have. Yeah, I went back to the Fringe. I started busking Covent Garden. I met you, right? Remember that? And then I would spend one of my girlfriends, Emma, who is a lawyer in Holland. She's a Dutch Canadian. Her and her kids and her man. Oh, and her husband actually got married, which is hilarious. It's hilarious for reasons I'm not going to get into, but they are married, and it's absolutely wonderful. He was living in Amsterdam, going to school, law school in Leiden, and I would go in. So for a few years there, it was like Canada in the spring. Vancouver was really great. Spring comes early, and busking's great. And then go back and forth to Toronto and Vancouver, and then go to Europe, and then I would end the season, always go to Edinburgh, and then go to London, and then go to Amsterdam. And I would do November in Amsterdam, and then sometimes February in Amsterdam, because February is not so great in London, but Amsterdam's always great. Like, there's always people in Amsterdam, except for right now, COVID-19. And that was it. So I bounced between Vancouver, Toronto, London, and Amsterdam. Forget gigs, just busk, you know? And I did that for the better part of a number of years. And then gigs here and there. And then, that leads it. That's almost, we're almost getting towards the present. This is,
well, before we hit on there, how do you think over this time that we've talked about so far in this hour and 48 minutes, hour and 38 minutes, how did your show progress? So you started off with the unicycle and the juggling, then you developed a show together. At what point, because your personal story has been so fascinating that we've not touched on the artistic progression. How has your show changed over those years? What do you think you developed and learned and really honed in your craft?
I think in terms of like hitting hard, I had experiences of hitting hard in a few different ways. One of them was
what do you mean by hitting hard? Just before you. So
when I've given workshops about street performing, one of the things I thought, I'm so envious of Alakazam. Like, I'm envious in this total fanboy fascination way. Like, I just absolutely love and respect that guy. You know, he's smart. He's super focused, and he's super intelligent, and he's very weirdly, uncannily charming. Like, every time I've seen him perform from way back then until now, amazing. And so when I've been listening to some of the ways that he's teaching busking, it's so interesting because it's very cerebral, you know, like, it's very calculating and very effective.
Facebook group Tips for Street Performers, if you want to check it out.
Yeah. My way was very different. Like, the way I thought about street performing was in broader, in less specific context. So in broader, more general principles, and those broader principles were based mostly on feelings, you know, like on the way that feelings work, like feelings that have shapes, like abstract shapes, but shapes nonetheless, like, you know, like consequent and conditional implicated ideas that work together, you know? contingencies or whatever. But these shapes. And one of the ideas I like about these shapes, about the idea of shapes, is that shapes as vectors, as analogs, can be compressed or stretched without information loss. So the idea of a circle can be, a circle that encompasses the solar system, or the circular field of an atom, like an electron around a nucleus. So a circle can be this big or this big, but it's the same principle in abstract, right? And so I thought about street performing like that. I came to think about street performing like that. And so the way that, when I say hit hard, what I mean is that if that shape is like a square, can be a square, it can be this weird rhomboid or a parallelogram. And parallelogram's less I don't know, compelling, right? A regular polygon is more compelling than some weird, various, unclosed, like shapeoid, I guess.
There's power in right angles.
Yeah, sure. Sure. Anyway, so what I was trying to do with performing was to create an analog, like this analog that I could impose in various circumstances. And that's actually how I thought about it. It's weird to say it with all those weird words, but that was it. Like it was sort of like a magic spell, like a power shape that you could impose into the real social context and create the growing circle, the vibrant energy, and then the people collapsing to give you the catch, right? Like that thing, right? There's social.
It almost feels like you're building a language to discuss a huge swathe of complex and at times intangible elements.
Yeah,
using its shape as a way to create a dialogue about something which is so complex that it verges on abstract.
Yeah. I was hoping you were going to say that it sounds like I was creating a religion, but that's neither here nor there. But yeah, the picture of the shape is temporal, right? Like projected through time. And another way that I used to think about it when I first started thinking in these terms. And again, here's another one of those points where I remember where I thought this thought. I thought the thought on, I remember sharing the thought too with Mike Johns, Mighty Mike, maybe in the same place. But anyway, I was busking in Toronto Harbourfront Centre, which, like, heads up, not every day of the week, but the best shows in Canada take place there. Okay, so that's, if you want to know, that's the pitch, the Toronto Harbourfront Centre. And I was there and I was thinking about, like, there's seagulls because it's right on the shore of Lake Ontario. And so there's seagulls, and I like birds. And, Nikola Tesla also liked birds. Who cares, but that's true.
He fed pigeons to his dying day, didn't he? He described them as his loves.
Yeah, what a guy. But anyway, so these birds are flying over, and they certainly notice. Like, birds are not these like weird robots that aren't involved in the world. They have super good vision, and they know what's going on, right? And they look at people, right? Like, if you go outside and see a bird, or if you go outside and a whole bunch of birds fly away, it's because of you, right? They know you're there. They're responding. So I thought about these birds flying overhead and sometimes circling over shows, or swooping and going over there and coming back, because the show is interesting, right? Like, from the top, from a bird's eye view, the show is like all the humans are scattered around doing a bunch of different stuff, and then briefly and very powerfully they assemble and start yelling once in a while, and then they scatter again. And so I started thinking about that shape, like that that process. And I thought about
flock dynamics.
Yeah, or swarm dynamics.
Swarm
dynamics. Or flock dynamics, or something else.
Right. Yeah.
But so I started thinking about that, and I would think in the first stage is static, right? There's just like a field, right, of like scattered energy. And then I used to think that if you ever want to know how much energy is in a public space when it seems like nothing's happening, go outside with a gun and shoot it off, and see how many windows get broken or people get trampled. Like, when there's a lot of people, there's a lot of potential energy, which crowds give evidence to, right? Like, a crowd screaming is a lot of energy, or a crowd jumping. Like, if everybody weighs 150 pounds or 180 pounds or whatever, and they all jump, it's like many, many tons of movement, right? So anyway, so static. And then the person in the middle, as the bird sees it, is starting to kind of signal. And the birds themselves are familiar with this because they do it too. They, tweet at each other, and they signal. And then people start looking and they start orienting toward the signal, and they start congregating toward it like a magnet, and then sooner or later they start acting together like as a single entity, like the crowd. Social contagion takes hold, and the various pieces collapse into a single higher order entity, and then the person in the middle is activating that thing, and then and that's what I thought of shows like. And then when I got my head around that shape or that process or that whatever it is, when I could start thinking in those terms, then deviations from that process began to be much more evident. So like if the show broke, or if the spell broke, like, why did that happen? And then that was the way that I would think about how to craft a show, right? Like how tight can I hold onto that crowd? And I remember when I started doing my motivational speaking thing, I went home from the first one. I was still living with my parents, having just been a returned missionary. And I told my dad, I was like, Dad, it was like magic. I feel like I could have got the crowd and then flipped them all over. Like they were so, like, social contagion is such a powerful force. And so that's the feeling that I have when I say like go big, or like hit hard or whatever, is this idea that I can take the crowd and make everybody do something, if it's jump or clap or scream or think or cry or whatever. And I'd experienced it with speaking. I'd experienced when I was a missionary giving my talks. I experienced it on the street at several different points in several different ways. But that feeling like you can drive a car, you can drive a train, and there's a lot more power in a train, but it's the same principle, And so I would try to think in my shows, how much power can I congregate, and because like it's easy to get self-congratulating and hubristic, which are two principles that I've come to despise in myself and when I see them in others. This idea that we are the creators, that like, oh, I did this big show and look at me. And it's like, well, I don't know, man, like it was them that were laughing. It was them that walked over to watch. It was them that were smiling. Like, you don't have 10,000 faces, asshole. Like, it's just you, right? But those principles are active. And if we can harness them or participate in them, we're only participants. We're certainly not the creators,
Yeah, I get that. The bird at the front of the flock who's kind of directing what's going on isn't the flock. It's just the one at the front of the flock. We've got 12 minutes left. I really wanted to talk to you about setting up the festival and doing that kind of stuff. I think we need more time for that. So would you be up for coming back on again?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, cool. So we've got another 12 minutes to chat. So I'd just like to talk to you a little bit more about crowd dynamics.
Sure.
And about how you feel about it now. Is there anything else particularly you want to add on to what you were saying before?
Yeah. I wrote some notes on because the first set of workshops I did about street performing took place in India, in Goa, in February of 2017 at what the hell was it called? It starts with an A and it has some sort of hippie new age name. What is it called? I can ask Sina Marie, she's around the corner, but it doesn't matter. There's a juggling festival that takes place in Arambol, Goa in February when there's not an international pandemic. And I did this series of 6 workshops, which I can find the notes and we can add them in a link in the future. But about crowd dynamics, like when I think about the idea of having this capacity, or having, like, recognizing this analog, this principle of humanity, which is actionable, right? Like you and I bust together a lot. You can go down the street and do your little fancy tricks, and it's like, is it 5 moves? Is it 25 moves? It doesn't matter. It's a set of moves and words and performances and observant, whatever it is. And then this social thing happens, right? The static assembles and activates and animates, and then, in a circle, which I think is kind of really nice, or often a circle, or some weirdos make squares all the time. But the Covent Garden Square, that fucking square.
I know this Covent Garden Square very well.
Yeah. But that whole thing, the fact that we can do it is like it's a gift. It's a beautiful, beautiful gift, And yeah, you know, we have to grind on the street, and we have to smoke a lot, and we have to complain about each other and all that stuff. But that principle of humanity is so valuable, so precious. And so one of my workshops was the second one was called feelings. And when I was motivational speaking, it's a weird thing to be a motivational speaker, and it's like motivational speakers are somewhere around lawyers and politicians and like in the social hierarchy of like legitimacy of whatever it is that you're saying. You know,
they're kind of they're part of polite society, yeah.
Yeah, they're part of polite society, but they're also sort of like semi-con artist salespeople. You know, like, you know,
they're bullshit gurus who wear nice suits.
Yeah, bullshit gurus, very nice. But the feelings, the feelings that persist, you know, and then the feelings again that are amplified by that dynamic of bringing people and, you know, invigorating, you know, and mutually invigorating, being invigorated likewise. But like, let's say we use the analogy of a color, you know, like the people come in and they animate and then they leave, and they come with a whole lot of resources to play with, right? Like you watch somebody's show, you watch like Dado's show. Like I just love Dado's work. You watch Dado's
one of my favorites. I think Dado's great.
Yeah. And it's like there's like this childhood innocence thing, but there's also this cheeky sort of naughtiness, which is just barely touched. You know, he just kind of goes there to keep it interesting, but he always brings it back to that childhood innocence, you know? What color could that be? Let's say that's green, you know? Or you look at Alakazam, you know, Alakazam, he's got that like sex, rock and roll, like super impressive and very commanding. Let's say that's red, right? Whatever the colors could be or mean, it doesn't matter. Like
it seems again like you're trying to create a language to describe these things. You're trying to create comparisons to. You're almost kind of, it's not personifying, but you're almost trying to personify the traits to give yourself different dialogue on it. It's very interesting.
Well, it's just like Wittgenstein, German.
Liechtenstein.
No, it's a W. Anyway, the idea that like we shouldn't talk about things that we don't understand. Like if we don't have a language for them, just ignore them, because like it's just confusing, you know. So if you want to talk about a concept that you lack the language for, then create the language. Otherwise, leave it alone. But yeah, if we want to get into like these fundamental phenomena and these aspects, they're real, they happen, but they're hard to describe because, you know, people talk about TV and, you know, microwave.
But even look at this. What is charisma? What is it?
Yeah, it's like,
you know, people have it. There's no doubt that people have it. I can see it. I can tell when it's there, but I can't tell you what it is. It's too amorphic. It's almost a term which is too inexact to really be appropriate, but it's the best we have.
Yeah, right. Yeah, certainly. But anyway, so about trying to make a language, you're correct. Like I'm trying to make a language because these concepts are out there, and there's many more besides. You know, the future is full of a lot more ideas than the past, you know, and we're going to need to elaborate our language to accommodate. But anyway, so the colors, if Alakazam's red and Dado's yellow, it doesn't matter. It's arbitrary. But thinking about what color are you and then what does it mean is the more important thing, you know, like, and what color are you exuding into the crowd? And color is maybe just too limited of a metaphor, but the feelings, right? Like I think about experience like this, like there's nature, right? There's the world happening, there's phenomenon. And then as we address it, like I can hear people cheering in the background. I don't know what they're cheering about, but if I listened, I could figure it out, right? So the cheering is happening, right? I'm aware of it, right? I can kind of feel it, but if I paid attention, I could think it, like think what's happening, right? So, right? And yeah, those ideas, like ideas are just indicating the world, right? Ideas are not themselves, they're abstractions. Ideas are just abstractions pointing somewhere.
Tiny little concepts as an effort to interpret what's going on around us.
Yeah, to interpret, but also to reanimate it, like to be able to indicate it so that we can, as we are, talk about it, right? Like we can't talk about it if there's nothing to talk about, right?
Exactly.
It's we talk about, but we need the language. And so, yeah, you know, these little metaphors or these little things are just to prompt the idea, like what is it that we're doing with all that energy, all that latent energy, that ever-present latent human energy, which we experience as social static everywhere where there's a few people doing nothing or something, right? And when we can pull that together in these little bursts of humanity, which take place on the face of the earth, under the sky, with the sun and the moon and the stars and the rest of the universe, like, what are we doing with that? Because it's super significant, you know? Or maybe it's not super significant, but it's at least it's real. You know, it's a real thing. And so if we can create reality, not create it, but if we can create a reality or bring a potential from reality into reality, bring it real. Like, what are we gonna do there? Like, I want to make mine yellow, or I want to make mine like fluorescent green, and whatever that means. If it means three things, like actually mean it, like go there with intention,
Sincerity.
Yeah, sincerity, yeah, and sincerity, like empowered sincerity. Like, if we're going to be sincere, like, what are we driving into the world? Like, what are we trying to invest there? How are we trying to empower each other? How are we also trying to reciprocally be empowered? Like,
before we go on, we're reaching the last few minutes now, so I want to give you a nice finishing question, and then you can say a few things to all the guys that have watched if you'd want to. Do you believe that I sense I know the answer, but I still want to hear it. Do you believe that what you do is important?
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
And why?
Like, I think that most of what happens in my life is these thoughts that aren't real. Like just these, jumping around like rainbows and fucking numbers. Like, hey, what are you thinking about? Like, I don't know what's actually happening. Fuck, I don't know. I got rainbows and numbers in my head. What are you up to? Like, stuff's happening, and like the world's happening, but like the participation part, like the going out and doing something, is like that's where we are. Like I can be thinking my thoughts in a cave. I can be thinking my thoughts like climbing a tree. But when I go out to the world and engage with the human family, like my family, your family, us, when I become part of the us, it matters. Like it matters what happens amongst us as a collective, as a very astonishing collective. Again, on the picture of the earth, it's not the picture, it's the actual earth. Like, I'm looking down, there's the earth, and you're on the earth over there a bit, but you're still there. And so is everybody else. And the earth is underneath the sky, and the stars are really, really far away, and it's just us here, and the birds and the bugs and everything else. But like, we're on the earth, and the best chance we have of having a great future is us doing the stuff that seems like it matters. And
you believe performance matters. Doing shows, going out and gathering crowds and influencing them is important.
And jumping around in my underpants, man, and smelling badly. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Last thing to say then for this is there anything you want to say to the guys that have been watching? We've had the guys watch from start to finish. We had Brian Reed, Joel Spence, Brian Hulse has in fact put a link on for a TED talk that he believes would be interesting on this. Is there anything you'd like to say to everyone who's watched?
I noticed that Brian earlier asked if I still see the kids, and I was in. So the kids he's referring to, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, are the boys from my Mormon experience at the late end of my Mormon time. And no, I don't see those kids anymore. Very sadly, I went and visited one after I left the church a few months later, and then also very shortly after I left the church, I wasn't in Toronto anymore. I was in the circus, which is actually quite close, for a number of years, but I was in a different world, like a parallel universe. And visiting with them was jarring in a way to me that was uncomfortable. And I think I probably projected that onto them, whether or not it was true. I went and visited with one of them named Josh. And there was, Josh, Nick, Andrew, and Greg. Yeah, Josh, Nick, Andrew, and Greg. I went and visited Josh, and I said, Josh, I'm sorry that I haven't been around. Things got a little bit crazy, and I wanted to keep you out of it. And he said, I just miss you. And that was the last time I saw him. So unfortunately, Brad, it's a good question, and it's a sad answer, but that is the truth. I haven't seen them since.
Well, I appreciate your honesty.
Well, let's end on something happy, though. You ask another question?
Yeah. So going through code and everything now, what do you see as the future for street performance after this? And we'll touch on this a lot more in the next interview, as we will touch on you organising festivals and putting together big citywide festivals in Canada, you going through and studying and doing a master's. What's the subject of your master's now?
Pornography is my go-to joke. But now my master's, I'm doing a master's at Roskilde University, and my program is called Social Entrepreneurship and Management.
And you're doing it specifically with public performance in public spaces. Am I right in thinking that?
I started with that ambition explicitly, and yeah, there's a lot more to this story, but
I mean, we'll discuss this a lot more in the next interview. I was just interested in that, and then I was going to use that as a step-off point to say, what do you think is going to happen after COVID for performance?
do that. Okay, so a few things, a few Cole's notes on. There is a field of social sciences. Social sciences are called by natural scientists special sciences sometimes, and when I hear special sciences, I think of special education. Okay, like the kind of like semi like half-brained sciences. But the social sciences are continually diversifying. There's a philosopher I like called Bruno Latour who talks about post-disciplinarity, and any of those words with a pre or post, especially the post ones, are transitional words. And there's another name for what that is in the future, right? Like postmodernism is not a thing; it's a transition to whatever postmodern, like the thing after modernism is. Bruno Latour says we haven't achieved modernism yet, and that's interesting on its own. But with one of those fields of the special sciences, social entrepreneurship is called there's a domain of research, of quite active research in festival studies. So like if you can think of festival sciences, festival studies is maybe more apt. But the publication, like the number of publications, the trend is like from 1970. 1970, it goes like this, and then around 2000.
Other way.
Okay, so 1970 goes like this, and then 2000 it goes like this. Okay, so there's a lot of research happening, and the research goes in a bunch of different ways. But in the year 2000, there's this agreement amongst many of the different researchers in festival studies or sciences who say that like cities all over the world are increasingly interested in creating festivals. And there's a number of reasons why that is. One of the reasons is that it's really, really good for the economy in the immediate area, in the immediate time that the festival takes place. Like 10,000 people in an area conveys a lot of economic benefits to the people around, right? Times 5 days or times Edinburgh, like 30% of their GDP of that city is the Edinburgh Fringe. But so there's the immediate economic benefits. And then also like cities are in competition for all kinds of resources, you know, like, and cities that have a good profile in terms of like having lots of events and having people who are happy and proud to be in their cities, they are better at attracting development, right? So like, where do you want to go? To this city where nothing happens, or this city where something happens? Well, we'll go to that one, right? All things.
So do you think that after COVID, then cities are going to be scrambling to utilize this theory?
I'll get to that in a second. Because there's a couple more of those things. Another thing that happens is, whereas until very recently, any community in the world, basically anywhere, was mostly homogenous and fairly stable. Right, the advent of the internet and the advent before the internet, trains, but mostly airplanes, have created this sort of like this modern nomad life where people can live anywhere. Like I live in Denmark, I'm from Canada. 100 years ago, that wouldn't happen very often.
No, it would have taken you months and months and months to travel across. You might have died in transit. Yeah, there was a lot of jeopardy and risk to it.
Yeah. So with that being the case, suddenly formerly homogenous societies are now heterogeneous, where people are all different. And so those people need something to rally around. And festivals do that, right? Like, hey, all your neighbors who are strangers, who you don't know, but you live in the same place, let's all get you down on the thing, and Dynamike will come and defend your children in his underwear, and then you can feel like a society, you know? So that's one. And there's a few more of those, but those are some of the primary appeals. And then also like just the basic value of culture, you know? Like people take money and buy art or go to the theater, and nothing happens except for they have some kind of experience, which is something happening. So just the basic value of culture. And that kind of refracts through a few directions too, which I'll leave alone. But the basic value of basic enthusiasm. Okay, so the basic value of festivals has become more and more apparent and more researched. So it's now more and more proclaimed, which makes it more and more apparent. So the curve is exponential. When COVID is over, all of those benefits are going to be the same. They're going to be real. And then there's going to be the added benefit that if there's like these 10 different factors that make festivals attractive to cities everywhere anyway, there'll be the thing where everyone feels lonely and really wants to re-engage. There'll be some people who are afraid, it seems, but people are going to really want to re-engage. And so to answer your question, are festivals going to be, or our city is going to be scrambling to make events? I think very much yes. And me and Sina Marie are trying to prepare ourselves for that eventuality, which is going to come as soon as lockdowns start falling. You know, people are scrambling. What I foresee is less and less mega events and more local events. I see the future as being much more decentralized and distributed, and like including like in terms of like abstract authority structures, but also like geographic realities. I think that Edinburgh should be refracted into 15 festivals in all those cities that don't get any of the action, you know, or Glastonbury could be, you know, 15 festivals that include 15 times as many people on stages, etc.
Yeah, I get you. And so usually we do 2 hours. I'm loving chatting. I could chat to you all night, mate, but I really feel the need that we've got to draw it to a close. Yeah. So the last thing I'm going to ask you is there anything you want to say just to everybody? Any message you want to give to the people you haven't seen for, you know, a couple of years through all of this? Yeah, sure.
Lots of love, gang. Dynamike loves you from the distance. I noticed that Brian, at the beginning of our chat, he mentioned that that he wasn't able to hear the video action. Matt had posted some hot video action at the start of the broadcast here, and there's a fun video that I really like, which I've just found, and I discovered today that the videos that you post on YouTube, you can actually download. I didn't know that.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can retrieve them.
Check it out. I spent years trying to find them on old computers and shit and having lost all these videos, and then they were locked up on Facebook. Fuck you, Mark Zuckerberg. And I found out you can download them, and so I'm in the process now of re-uploading them to YouTube.
You can also download from Facebook.
Yeah, and so what I would like to say to people is, if you want to see the cow video, if you missed it, it's the first video on my Dynamike Loves You channel on YouTube. And as it stands,
we will put that the URL in the chat directly after the video. So if you want to check it, give me a couple of minutes, check bio the video, and then we'll be there in the bottom of the chat.
That's great, because I've tried to make videos because I find it like spiritually cathartic and also more diverse than street performing. Right, with street performing is kind of like,
yeah, but you have to achieve the goal, and you can't. You can only diverge so much.
Yeah, with videos, you can just go fucking anywhere. So I've got all sorts of weird videos. My favorite one is about an interaction I had with a very special young cow that I met in India. And it is on youtube.com. Search for Dynamike Loves You, because my 31 followers after 9 years of action haven't prompted YouTube to give me the ability to have a URL that makes sense. So you have to actually search and probably fail to find me, but there's a cow in there that wants you to look at it.
Cool. So Mike, it really genuinely has been an absolute pleasure to chat. It always is, and today it's been fascinating. Genuinely is.
It's been really inspiring to me.
Cool. Well, I'm glad I could, mate. I'm glad I could, and I look forward to the next time we get to do this interview again. Everybody's watching.
Thanks, everybody.
Guys. Yeah, thank you for watching. I'll say it again. This is the kind of stuff I ask you to do, if you can, to help the channel keep running, to help more people see it. And we want more people to see it. I know you love guys street performers as well. And wouldn't it be great if we got more of a cultural stake in society? Hopefully projects like this and other projects can help with that. So please share, like, subscribe. If you haven't commented yet, say hi. Say if you enjoyed it. Say if you thought we were utterly wrong. Just put that in the comments. It will create an interesting discussion. If you can go to the Patreon and put in a couple of pounds a week, it makes a couple of pounds a month. It makes a massive difference.
I do that,
Mike.
Just so I can.
Mike does. Yeah. Mike is a Patreon. So if anyone wants to become a patron of the channel, it would help. At the moment, the channel does run at a loss. It costs me money to do. I'm spending about £100 a month running the channel through the associated costs, and I get £18, I think it is, or £19 from patronage. So if you want to come in and put a couple of quid in the Patreon, that'd be amazing. Otherwise, if you can't do that, I understand it's a hard time, particularly for all of us performers. So just like, share, subscribe, join any of the archives we've got on Facebook, Whining On with Public Performers, or the YouTube channel. And otherwise from that, everybody have a lovely Friday evening, and I will catch you on Monday to interview Mr. Living Space. Have a good one, everybody. Goodbye.